I didn't write this book. I stole it. Several summers ago, I received a call in my workshop on Rue des Bernardins from the noted bibliophile and book collector, B.T. Ellingham. She wished to have me bind a loose-leaf manuscript that she described as the pride of her collection. There were no constraints of time or money, she said, but there was a condition, to which I agreed. I was not to read its contents. The manuscript was, in her estimation, priceless, and I was to bind it accordingly. We agreed that it would be bound in what is called the causeway style, in doublure, framed with pearls, using materials that she would provide. I'd known B.T. Ellingham all my life. She was one of the Philadelphia Ellinghams. She had married into the Belgian aristocracy, but, having been widowed early, reverted to her maiden name and never remarried. She divided her time between her apartment on the Boulevard Haussmann and her estate in Belgium. Privately, and as a term of affection, my wife and I referred to her as the Baroness, although there was in fact nothing remotely pompous or ceremonial about her. The Baroness was my oldest and most loyal client, as she had been for my father before I inherited the bindery. In the course of a long collector's life, she had assembled one of the finest private libraries in existence of material pertaining to Charles Baudelaire. She was more than a collector. Even the word bibliophile did not quite do her justice. She was an obsessive. She lavished on her books the same doting affection other members of her class reserve for horses and wine. She accorded as much importance to a book's binding as to its contents. To her, bookbinding was an art, and a bookbinder an artist, almost the equal of the writer. A well-crafted, bespoke binding, she liked to say, is the finest compliment a book can be paid. Whenever I undertook one of her commissions, the Baroness would visit my studio, keeping an interested eye on proceedings, without interfering. For her, it was a pleasure to witness a rare book given a second lease of life in an equally rare binding. And as her collection was intended only for her private pleasure, and her fortune inexhaustible, she liked to indulge her whims to the fullest extent of the law, and even, on occasion, beyond it. Previously, I'd bound a rare Arabic copy of Le Spleen de Paris in leather made from the skin of a black panther, and an illustrated underground edition of the banned poems of Les Fleurs du Mal in alligator skin with inlays of water python. 3 days after her call, the manuscript was delivered by a young fellow on a scooter. He didn't remove his helmet, which muffled his voice and obscured his face. He handed me a package containing the manuscript and the leather with which to bind it. I immediately placed it in a safety deposit box I keep above the workshop. There are many decisions to be made when binding a book, over and above the choice of binding material. The inlays, onlays, gilding, embossing, stitching, stamping, end papers, ex libris, boards, frontispiece, edges, headband, glue, joints, marbling slipcase, the title page, all these were choices about which the Baroness, for all the trust she invested in me, liked to be consulted before any work could begin. That evening, I opened the package to inspect it. 7 lustrous pearls tumbled out of their black velvet purse. The enclosed leather was dyed coral red. The ivory miniature was not, as is traditionally the case with causeway-style binding, a portrait, but a stylized illustration in black ink of an open eye. Finally, I took in hand the manuscript itself. Even when specifically instructed not to read it, the most scrupulous bookbinder cannot help but accidentally glimpse certain words or phrases. In this case, the handwritten title leaped out at me. Crossings. Underneath the title was a long jumble of figures, also handwritten, seemingly without any bearing on the manuscript. It consisted of what appeared to be 3 separate documents, all written by hand in French, although one of them was significantly older than the other 2 and written in a different hand. The manuscript appeared to have had an eventful existence. Many of the pages were creased, folded over, or mottled with damp, and the paper itself was yellowing and pungent with the chocolatey, nutty aroma that old paper exhales as it decays. It took me a week to call the Baroness, a little longer than usual, and when I finally did so, a man's voice I didn't recognize answered the telephone and informed me she had very recently passed away, peacefully, in her sleep. When I inquired about the funeral, I was told it had taken place only the day before at her Belgian estate. The news so surprised me that I forgot to ask what to do about the manuscript.